It all started on a busy weekday morning in a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where regulars came in for coffee, gossip, and a smile from the waitstaff. Among them was a young waitress named Emily. She was quiet, polite, and always kept her head down as she took orders and cleared tables. To anyone watching, she looked like just another struggling worker trying to get by. But there was something about her that made people whisper. Some employees claimed she was too curious. Others swore they had caught her lingering around the break room or asking questions that didn't make sense for someone in her position. At first, the murmurs didn't seem serious, until one day the police showed up at the diner. The moment the officers stepped through the door, the entire restaurant froze. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, coffee cups clinked against saucers, and every eye followed as the cops made their way toward Emily. The manager, who had been suspicious of her from the beginning, pointed straight at her, his voice sharp with accusation. "That's the one. She's been stalking employees." Without hesitation, the officers approached the young waitress, handcuffs ready. Emily's co-workers exchanged stunned looks, some relieved, others curious, but most simply confused. Why would anyone target a waitress, of all people? Emily stood frozen, her notepad slipping from her hands as the officers surrounded her. She didn't resist, didn't argue, and didn't try to explain. Instead, she gave a faint, almost knowing smile, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. The customers watched in silence, phones raised to record the scene, whispering theories about who she really was and what she had done. To them, she was a criminal. To her co-workers, she was the strange girl who finally got caught. But no one in that diner had any idea just how wrong they all were. As Emily was led out of the restaurant in handcuffs, the atmosphere buzzed with speculation. The manager puffed up with pride, thinking he had exposed a threat within his staff. Some workers cheered quietly under their breath, glad the stalker was gone. But beneath the surface, there was a story none of them knew, a story that could change their lives forever. Because Emily wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just another face blending into the background of a small-town diner. She was someone with far more power than any of them could imagine. For months, she had been watching, listening, and keeping track of the way employees were treated, taking mental notes about things the staff thought no one noticed. The long hours, the disrespect, the underpaid shifts, the favoritism, the whispered complaints when the boss wasn't around. Emily knew it all. She had walked in with a secret that, if revealed, would turn the diner upside down and leave every single person questioning what they thought they knew about her. And now, as the flashing red and blue lights painted the street outside, no one realized that the woman in handcuffs was about to change everything. Because Emily wasn't just a waitress accused of stalking her co-workers. She was the undercover CEO. And the truth about why she was there hadn't even begun to surface. Emily sat quietly in the back of the police car, the cold steel of the handcuffs pressing against her wrists. From the outside, she looked like a young woman whose life had just fallen apart. But behind her calm eyes was something the officers couldn't read. She wasn't panicking, wasn't begging for her innocence, and she certainly wasn't confused. Instead, she studied the reflection of the diner in the car window, watching as her co-workers crowded near the entrance, whispering to one another. To them, this was the end of her story. For Emily, it was only the beginning. Back inside the diner, the staff tried to settle back into routine, but nothing felt normal. The manager, Mr. Collins, walked around with a smug look on his face, telling anyone who would listen that he had suspected Emily all along. He called her sneaky and untrustworthy, claiming she spent too much time near the office where the schedules and payroll sheets were kept. Some of the waitresses nodded, though uneasily. Others weren't so sure. Emily had never done anything to harm them. If anything, she had always been the first to help when someone dropped a tray or when a customer grew rude. Still, the label of stalker now hung heavy in the air, and once people start to believe a story, it's hard to shake it. What no one knew was that Emily's story had started long before she ever tied on that apron. Months earlier, she had been sitting in a glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of a corporate tower. Her name wasn't Emily the waitress. Her name was Emily Harper, CEO of the very company that quietly owned the chain of diners. She had inherited the position after years of working behind the scenes, but unlike most executives, she wasn't satisfied with numbers on paper. She wanted to see the truth of what was happening on the ground, where ordinary people worked the longest hours for the smallest pay. Her plan had been simple: step into the shoes of her employees and see the world through their eyes. But simple plans often turn complicated. The longer she stayed at the diner, the more she noticed the small cracks no report or spreadsheet could ever reveal. Workers afraid to speak up, corners being cut, favoritism shown to certain staff, and a manager who seemed to thrive on intimidation. She had written everything down, but not on paper. It was all in her mind, carefully catalogued, carefully remembered. She had been gathering evidence in silence, and that silence is what made her look suspicious. Now, as the squad car drove her through town, Emily replayed every step in her mind. She remembered the young dishwasher who worked double shifts just to support his family. She thought of the single mother waitress who broke down in the back room after being denied time off. And she remembered how Mr. Collins had once laughed when a cook begged for a raise, calling him replaceable. Emily had seen it all, and it burned into her memory. She hadn't stalked anyone. She had simply been paying attention. The officers in the front seat chatted quietly, glancing back at her now and then. They didn't know who she was, and she wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. She needed to wait for the right moment. Because revealing her identity too soon would ruin everything she had worked for. The tension was building, and she could feel the weight of the secret pressing heavier with each passing mile. Back at the diner, the staff kept whispering. Why was she here? What did she want? Who was she really? Questions hung in the air, but no answers came. And outside in the parking lot, the flashing lights faded into the distance, carrying with them the one person who knew the truth about the diner's hidden flaws. Emily's arrest might have seemed like an ending. But for those who had been mistreated, ignored, and silenced for far too long, it was only the spark of something much bigger. None of them knew it yet, but the undercover CEO wasn't done. Not even close. The police car rolled to a stop outside the station, and Emily was escorted inside. Officers spoke in clipped tones, treating her like just another case file, but Emily's silence unnerved them. She gave no excuses, no explanations, only steady glances that hinted she knew more than she let on. One officer, younger than the rest, frowned as he led her to a chair. Something about her calmness didn't match the accusations written on the report. Stalking employees. He had seen stalkers before. They were nervous, unstable, or desperate. But Emily seemed composed. Almost like she was waiting for them to figure out the truth themselves. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the tension thickened. Mr. Collins wasted no time in telling his version of the story to anyone who would listen. She was snooping around the office, asking about everyone's schedules. Classic stalker behavior, he said, puffing out his chest. A few employees nodded along, not because they fully believed him, but because they feared disagreeing. Collins had a way of making life difficult for those who challenged him. His influence lingered like a shadow over the diner, and for years people had learned to keep their heads down. But Emily's arrest had stirred something. Whispers started forming in corners. What if she hadn't been stalking? What if she had been trying to protect them? One waitress, Sarah, couldn't shake the memory of Emily helping her when she broke down after a long shift. Emily hadn't judged her or brushed it off, she had listened. Sarah remembered Emily's words. Sometimes the hardest stories are the ones no one wants to hear. At the time, Sarah thought it was just kindness. Now it felt like a clue. In the back kitchen, the dishwasher, Miguel, kept quiet but watched closely. He had seen Emily jot something on a napkin one day after Collins berated the cook for burning toast. It wasn't the kind of note a stalker would write. It looked more like a list, like she was keeping track of everything wrong that happened. Miguel wondered if she had been gathering evidence, though he dared not say it out loud. Collins had eyes everywhere. At the police station, Emily's calm exterior began to draw suspicion from the younger officer, Officer Daniels. As he processed her paperwork, he leaned in slightly and asked, "Why don't you just tell us what's going on? You don't seem like what they're saying you are." Emily gave the faintest smile but stayed silent. She knew one slip could ruin her entire plan. Every move she made had to be careful. She wasn't here to clear her name quickly. She was here to expose something bigger. Behind the scenes, the company boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. Some executives had begun to notice Emily's absence from scheduled meetings. A few were loyal, aware of her undercover mission, but others were uneasy. Whispers of her vanishing act had started reaching investors. If word leaked that the CEO had been arrested as a waitress, it could create a scandal big enough to shake the entire chain of diners. But Emily wasn't worried about her reputation. She was worried about what she had uncovered: patterns of mistreatment, unfair wages, and intimidation that stretched far beyond one diner. She had seen enough to know this wasn't an isolated problem. And now, sitting in that police station, she realized her arrest might be the very moment that forced hidden truths into the light. The diner staff, however, were left in limbo. Some began to question their own silence. Others clung to Collins's version of events, too afraid to imagine an alternative. Tension rippled through every corner of the restaurant, pulling people apart and drawing them into quiet debates. No one knew what was true. But one thing was clear: Emily had left behind more questions than answers, and those questions weren't going away anytime soon. And while Collins celebrated what he thought was a victory, he had no idea that his biggest problem was only beginning to unfold. Because Emily's silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And the storm she had set in motion was moving closer with every passing hour. The hours ticked by at the police station, but Emily remained silent, her composure steady, her expression unreadable. Officer Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. He watched her closely from his desk, noticing how she studied the room, how her eyes lingered on every detail. Most people in custody fidgeted or pleaded, but Emily seemed to be waiting for something or someone. The uncertainty gnawed at him, and he began to dig deeper into her file. But the information was sparse. No priors, no history, nothing that fit the accusations of stalking. It didn't add up, and Daniels knew it. Back at the diner, the atmosphere was boiling. Sarah and Miguel exchanged quiet glances while Collins strutted around like a man who had just won a prize. He repeated his story to the regulars, each retelling making Emily sound more dangerous, more unstable. She was always asking questions, he insisted. Always snooping. I told you she was trouble. His words carried weight, but beneath them, doubt was spreading. Sarah whispered to another waitress, "What if she wasn't snooping? What if she was checking on us?" The thought lingered like smoke in the air, unsettling but impossible to ignore. Late that night, Sarah went into the back storage room and found something Emily had left behind. Tucked into a corner beneath a stack of menus was a small notebook. Flipping it open, Sarah gasped. Inside were pages filled with careful notes, not about people's private lives, but about the working conditions, Collins's behavior, and the struggles of the staff. Each page told the story of the diner from the workers' point of view. And suddenly everything clicked. Emily hadn't been stalking. She had been documenting. But before Sarah could share her discovery, Collins appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the room. "What are you doing back here?" he asked sharply. Sarah quickly closed the notebook and hid it behind her back, her heart pounding. She forced a smile and muttered something about organizing menus, but Collins's eyes narrowed. He knew something was off. At the same time, in the city's corporate offices, a few of Emily's closest allies were beginning to panic. One executive had received a tip about her arrest, and the news spread through whispered phone calls. If the media picked up the story, everything Emily had worked for could collapse before she revealed the truth. Pressure mounted as board members argued, some demanding her immediate return, others fearing the fallout of exposing what she had discovered. But none of them could interfere yet. Emily had gone undercover for a reason, and she had warned them to trust her judgment no matter what happened. Back in the police station, Officer Daniels finally stumbled upon something that made his stomach drop. A quiet search pulled up Emily's real identity. Not as a waitress, not as a stalker, but as Emily Harper, CEO. He froze, staring at the screen, the weight of the revelation pressing hard. The woman sitting calmly in handcuffs wasn't just anyone. She was the owner of the very business that had accused her. Daniels looked across the room at Emily, who met his gaze with the faintest nod, as though she knew exactly what he had just discovered. Meanwhile, Sarah held the notebook tightly, torn between fear of Collins and the need to tell the truth. Miguel noticed her trembling hands and whispered, "What did you find?" But before she could answer, Collins's voice cut through the diner, louder and sharper than ever. He had noticed the shift in the room, the unease in the staff, and he wasn't going to let control slip from his hands. His suspicions of Emily's true purpose were growing, and with her gone, he was determined to stamp out whatever she might have left behind. The threads of truth and lies were pulling tighter, weaving toward a breaking point. Emily's silence, the staff's doubts, Collins's arrogance, and the company's secrets were all colliding. Something was about to snap, and everyone could feel it, the storm hovering just out of sight, ready to strike. Sarah gripped the notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew what was inside could change everything, but Collins was prowling the diner like a hawk, watching every move. She slipped it into her apron pocket, forcing herself to smile as though nothing was wrong. Still her mind raced. The entries detailed mistreatment, unfair schedules, and even names of staff who had been quietly pushed out after standing up to Collins. But there was one page that made her heart pound harder than the rest. Emily had written, "If I disappear, it won't be by mistake. Look closer at who benefits." That sentence shook Sarah to her core. She had thought Emily's arrest was humiliating, maybe unfair, but harmless in the bigger picture. Now, she wondered if it had been orchestrated. Collins had pushed hard for the police to come. What if it wasn't just suspicion? What if he had been hiding something, and Emily had gotten too close? At the police station, Officer Daniels debated whether to reveal what he had discovered. If he told his superiors that the so-called waitress was actually the CEO, the arrest could turn into a scandal. But if he stayed silent, Emily might never get the chance to reveal the truth herself. As he hesitated, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Leave her where she is. Do not dig further." His blood ran cold. Whoever sent that message knew exactly what he had found. Emily, watching Daniels from across the room, seemed to sense his unease. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a quiet urgency. It wasn't just Collins anymore. Someone higher up, someone with power beyond the diner, wanted her silenced. Daniels realized this went deeper than a single manager abusing staff. It was systemic, and Emily had stumbled into the center of it. Back at the diner, Miguel noticed Sarah's nervous glances toward Collins. When she finally whispered about the notebook, his jaw clenched. "We can't let him see it," he said firmly. "If Emily trusted this to be found, then it's our job to protect it." Sarah nodded, though fear weighed heavily on her. For the first time, she realized that Emily hadn't been working alone. She had planted seeds, quietly earning trust, leaving behind clues for the people who needed them most. But Collins was no fool. Late into the night, he made a phone call in his office, his voice low but sharp. "She's out of the way for now, but we have a problem. The staff are restless. If they talk, everything we've built could unravel." He paused, listening, then muttered, "Don't worry. I'll handle it." His words sent a chill through the thin walls of the diner, overheard by Miguel, who had lingered after closing. Miguel froze in the shadows, realizing Collins was hiding far more than any of them imagined. The tension was spiraling out of control. Emily sat in custody with the truth burning inside her. Daniels wrestled with the threat on his phone. Sarah clutched the notebook that could expose everything, and Miguel had just overheard a call that hinted at something darker. Collins thought he had won, but the ground beneath him was shifting fast. And yet, a bigger twist was still waiting. Because Collins wasn't the only one on the phone that night. Someone else miles away had been listening in. Someone powerful, someone connected to the very board Emily was trying to protect. And that person had just decided the game had changed. The next morning, tension at the diner was thicker than the smell of burnt coffee. Sarah and Miguel had barely slept, the weight of Emily's notebook pressing heavy on their minds. They knew they couldn't stay silent any longer. As Collins barked orders and strutted across the floor, Sarah slipped the notebook into Miguel's hands. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, "you make sure people see this." Miguel nodded, but before either of them could act, the diner door swung open. Emily walked in. The entire room froze. She wasn't in handcuffs, wasn't escorted by officers. She stood tall, calm and unshaken, as though nothing had happened at all. Collins's face drained of color. How did you?" he stammered, but Emily raised her hand to silence him. Behind her, Officer Daniels stepped inside, his expression firm. He had pieced it all together, choosing to believe the truth over the threats he had received. And now he was standing with Emily. "You accused me of stalking," Emily said, her voice steady but sharp. "But what I was really doing was listening, to the people you silenced, the lives you treated as disposable." Gasps rippled through the staff. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out copies of the notes Sarah had found. "I've documented every unfair shift, every intimidation tactic, every violation of basic respect. And now, it doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to all of you." She placed the papers on a table, where staff quickly crowded around, reading their own experiences written in black and white. Collins's arrogance cracked. He shouted, tried to discredit her, even accused the staff of lying. But no one was listening to him anymore. For the first time, their voices were louder than his. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "We thought she was against us. But she was fighting for us." Miguel added, "She's the only one who ever saw what was really happening." The staff began to nod, one by one, until the entire diner seemed to stand against Collins. And then came the twist no one expected. Emily turned to face them all. "You know me as a waitress," she said. "But my name is Emily Harper. I am the CEO of this company." The room erupted in gasps. Some dropped their trays. Others covered their mouths. Collins staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. No, you're lying," he spat. But Daniels stepped in, confirming the truth with a firm nod. Collins tried to slip away, but Emily's eyes locked on him. "You thought you could hide behind intimidation," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "But your time is over." Daniels moved forward, this time not to arrest Emily, but to take Collins into custody. The staff watched as the man who had ruled over them with fear was finally let out, powerless and exposed. Relief washed over the room like sunlight after a storm. But just as everyone began to breathe again, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. A single message appeared. Collins was never the only one. "Watch your back." The victory was real, but the war wasn't over. And as Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket, she knew the fight had only just begun. The diner was quiet after Collins was taken away, the staff still standing in stunned silence. For years they had endured his sharp words, his intimidation and his control. Now, in a matter of minutes, everything had shifted. The man they feared was gone, and the woman they had misunderstood stood before them, not just as their co-worker, but as their CEO. Emily looked around at their faces that had once been filled with doubt and suspicion, now replaced with relief and cautious hope. She smiled softly. "This place doesn't just belong to one person. It belongs to all of you. And from today, things are going to change." Sarah stepped forward, the notebook still clutched in her hands. "We thought you were here to watch us, to judge us," she said quietly. "But you were here to understand us." Emily nodded. "That notebook is full of your voices. It wasn't mine alone. It's proof of what you've been living through. And no one can ignore it anymore." Sarah handed it back, her hands trembling, but Emily shook her head. Keep it. It belongs with the people who trusted me without even knowing it. Miguel finally spoke, his voice stronger than usual. You gave us something no one else ever did. You listened. Emily met his eyes. That's all most people need. To be heard. Around the diner, the staff exchanged looks. Small smiles, quiet nods, like a heavy weight had finally been lifted. For the first time they felt seen. Officer Daniels lingered near the door, watching the scene unfold. He had taken a risk in siding with Emily, but seeing the staff gather around her, he knew it had been worth it. Before leaving, he approached her and lowered his voice. That message you got earlier. Do you know who it was from? Emily glanced down at her phone, then back at him. I have a good idea. Collins wasn't acting alone. There are others who profited from this system. But I'll deal with them when the time comes. Daniels studied her expression, sensing the determination behind her calm tone. Be careful, he warned. Emily gave a faint smile. Careful is what got us here. Now it's time to be bold. Over the next few days, the diner began to feel different. Staff who had once kept their heads down now spoke up about scheduling, pay, and respect. Emily kept her promise. She returned not as their undercover waitress, but as their leader, determined to rebuild the culture from the ground up. She made it clear that their well-being mattered as much as the business itself. Slowly, the walls of fear that Collins had built started to crumble, replaced with something stronger: trust. The news of the undercover CEO spread quickly. Other diners in the chain began buzzing with stories of change, of workers finally being treated fairly. Investors were surprised, but many quietly admired her courage. What could have been a scandal turned into a statement. Leadership wasn't about power, it was about people. One evening, as Emily closed her notebook for the last time, she thought about everything that had happened. She had come to the diner to see the truth for herself, and she had found more than mistreatment. She had found resilience, strength, and loyalty among the very people who had once doubted her. They had stood together, and that unity was the real victory. Still, the message on her phone lingered in her mind like a shadow. She knew there were others out there who wouldn't welcome the changes she was making. But instead of fear, she felt resolve. Whatever battles lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. The staff who once saw her as a stranger now saw her as their ally. And together they were stronger than anyone expected. Emily Harper, once just the quiet waitress, had proven that listening could be the greatest act of leadership. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one truth was clear. The undercover CEO had turned doubt into hope, and in doing so, she had changed not just a diner, but every life connected to it.